world is constantly changing, and threats to global security are evolving rapidly. We often get so caught up in what might happen next that we forget about what's happening right now. Today, we'll take a look back at November 2024 and discuss the major security events that unfolded. While we cannot cover everything, we'll do our best to provide a comprehensive overview. Our discussion will be based on reports from organizations like ACLED, Crisis Group, the UN Security Council, and various think tanks. Thank you for your valuable work and efforts. We know there's a lot to cover, and you might be confused, but we hope you'll find this podcast informative and engaging. Always stay safe.
All right, let's jump right into our November 2024 Global Security Deep Dive.
Yeah, I think November was quite a month.
It was a crazy month.
It was, a lot happening.
We've got North Korean troops in Ukraine, Trump back in the White House.
Yeah. That's a big deal right there.
And how's that going to affect U.S. foreign policy? Who knows?
Yeah, we're seeing, I think, some of that already.
So let's start with the big picture.
Yeah.
We always check in with the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, ACLE.
Yeah.
What were they seeing kind of globally in November?
Well, I mean, basically, they're seeing what we're seeing, which is just, things are continuing to kind of heat up around the world. A lot of the same conflicts continuing, escalating, a lot of humanitarian crises worsening, and, a number of political situations deteriorating.
Right. And I think what's fascinating is how interconnected some of these events are.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got the Israel-Hamas conflict, which we're going to talk about more in detail, but its impacts are being felt all over the place, right?
Oh, yeah, far beyond the region.
Even impacting negotiations in the DRC.
Absolutely, which is fascinating because you wouldn't necessarily think of those two things as connected.
Right, exactly.
But that's just the nature of the world we live in today.
That's the nature of global security today.
Yeah.
So speaking of, a crisis and how it can have global implications, let's look at Pakistan.
Okay.
The International Crisis Group, in their Crisis Watch report called Pakistan, a nation at a crossroads.
Yeah, I saw that. A nation at a crossroads.
What did you make of that?
Well, I mean, I think they're right.
Yeah.
When you think about it, you've got Imran Khan's supporters clashing with security forces. You've got militant attacks on the rise. You've got sectarian tensions, kind of bubbling under the surface. And then you add in the fact that it's an election year.
Right.
This is a really big deal.
Huge deal.
And it's particularly concerning when you consider Pakistan's history, right? They've had a history of military coups. Right. And so you kind of wonder, are we looking at another one here? I mean, the parallels are kind of striking.
That's a chilling thought.
Yeah, it's definitely something to watch.
So let's turn our attention to Africa.
Okay.
ACLED. The data highlights a disturbing trend, this rise of military coups across the continent.
It's really remarkable, yeah. And it seems to be, in some ways it seems to be spreading.
Right.
You have this new alliance of Sahel states challenging traditional power structures like ECOWAS.
Right. It's a huge deal, right?
It is. It's a potential power shift,
Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, all now under military rule, forming this alliance,
right,
seemingly stepping away from Western-backed institutions.
Right, exactly.
And then we have to add to the complexity the UN's ability to effectively address these crises.
Yeah.
A report from the Stimson Center really delved into the struggles of the UN's Office on Genocide Prevention and the responsibility to protect the OSAPG.
Yeah, the office faces a real uphill battle. In a world where, political maneuvering often trunks humanitarian concerns.
Right.
And we're seeing that play out, especially in places like Africa.
Right, where there are competing interests.
Right, a lack of political will.
Okay, so let's move from these kind of traditional conflict zones to this battlefield that is becoming more and more important every day, and that's cyberspace.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Research in contemporary security policy reveals that cyber tactics are being used.
Yeah.
To disrupt communications, to spread disinformation, real-world consequences.
Right. It's not just about, hacking anymore. It's about controlling the narrative. Right. It's about influencing populations, potentially crippling infrastructure.
Right. It's no longer science fiction.
No.
This is the reality of modern warfare.
Absolutely.
Now, on that unsettling note, we have the reported use of riot control agents, RCAs, in the Ukraine conflict.
Yeah, what a mess.
Our USI analysis asked the question, has Russia crossed a line by using these chemical agents?
Well, the analysis really gets into the kind of the weeds of the Chemical Weapons Convention, the CWC,
Right.
and the difficulties of determining intent, holding perpetrators accountable.
Right.
And the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the OPCW, they face huge hurdles in investigating and verifying these claims, especially in a conflict zone where access is limited and political tensions are so high.
Right. And meanwhile, back in the U.S., there are growing concerns about the implications of this permanent war economy.
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot about that.
The Stimson Center put out a report highlighting concerns about this ever-increasing national security budget
It just keeps going up and up.
and its potential impact on economic growth, societal priorities.
Right. I mean, this spending represents choices, right?
Right.
We're choosing to invest in military might over things like education,
Right.
healthcare, infrastructure.
And those are choices that we're making every day.
Exactly.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
finally, let's talk about a tool often used in the name of security: anti-terrorism laws.
Oh.
Research out of the London School of Economics examines the history and evolution of these laws,
I've seen some of that, yeah.
highlighting that tension, right, between security and liberty.
Yeah, classic tension.
Professor Conor Geardy's work points out how the definition of terrorism itself is often used selectively,
Mm-hmm.
often to serve political agendas.
Yeah, and, I think a really stark example of that is what we're seeing right now in Gaza, right?
Right.
I mean, Israel's actions seem to be, they're really pushing the boundaries of international legal frameworks.
Right.
And it raises this fundamental question, are these laws ultimately tools for justice,
Right.
or are they instruments of oppression?
And that's a question that I think we need to be asking ourselves more and more as these events unfold.
Absolutely. It's a critical question, and it's a question with huge implications,
Right.
for international law, state-sanctioned violence, all of that.
Right, right.
And speaking of potential violations, we got to talk about Iran's nuclear program.
Yeah. It seems like those stalled JCPOA talks, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action,
Yeah.
and that recent IAEA resolution censuring Iran,
Right.
it really seems like it pushed Tehran to get more, aggressive.
Yeah, they're definitely pushing the envelope.
They've announced they're launching advanced centrifuges.
Right.
It's not clear if they're going to honor the commitment to halt the production of 60% enriched uranium.
Yeah, and then you add in Trump back in the White House.
Right, and he pulled the U.S. out of the JCPOA the first time around.
Exactly. So, it's a very volatile situation.
And it's not just the nuclear issue.
No.
The UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Iran
Yeah.
has issued a pretty stark warning about the crackdown on dissent there.
Yeah, particularly the suppression of that women life freedom movement.
Right.
It's brutal.
So let's move geographically a bit and look at Central Asia.
Okay.
Kazakhstan hosted a security summit last month, bringing together leaders from across the region.
Interesting. Yeah.
What was the focus there?
Well, regional cooperation was a big theme. Tackling shared threats like terrorism, extremism, drug trafficking.
Right.
It seems like Central Asian countries are realizing they need to work together,
Makes sense.
to deal with these transnational issues.
But it's not just about regional cooperation.
No, of course not.
They're also trying to navigate this really complex geopolitical landscape, balancing their relations with Russia, China, the West.
Right. That's a tough balancing act,
It is.
especially with the war in Ukraine and the rivalry between the U.S. and China.
Right. Everyone wants them in their sphere of influence.
Exactly.
Latin America is also facing a wave of instability. We saw mass protests erupt in Colombia last month.
Yeah, I saw those, driven by economic hardship and political discontent.
Right. People feel like their concerns are being ignored,
Right.
and these protests are highlighting those deep inequalities.
Yeah, the ones that continue to plague the country.
And then there's Haiti, a nation in chaos.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. The gang violence, the humanitarian crisis, the political paralysis.
It's just a tragic example of state failure.
And I think it's fair to say that the international community has largely failed to provide effective support.
Yeah, pretty much.
The Haitian people are bearing the brunt of this crisis.
And it really highlights the human cost of instability,
So now let's turn to a region that's seen way more than its fair share of turmoil, the Middle East.
Right.
The Israel-Hamas war has left a trail of devastation.
Yeah.
And any chance for a peaceful resolution seems, impossible at this point.
Yeah, it feels very far off.
The war has exposed deep divisions within Israeli society.
Right.
The shortcomings of the Palestinian leadership.
And, really the limits of the international community to mediate anything.
And the consequences are being felt all over.
No.
It's escalated tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Right. Both of them competing for influence in the aftermath.
Right, exactly.
And that rivalry between those two is really one of the key drivers of instability.
In the whole region.
Yeah, it's fueling conflicts all over the place, from the proxy war in Yemen to this, broader competition for dominance.
Syria is another country where the war rages on.
Yeah, although it's less intense these days.
Assad solidified his control, but pockets of resistance are holding on.
Right.
And the humanitarian situation is catastrophic.
Yeah, I mean, it's a reminder of how resilient these authoritarian regimes can be.
Right.
Despite everything Assad has done, he's managed to cling to power, backed by Russia and Iran. So it's really a cautionary tale.
And speaking of dictatorships, we can't forget North Korea.
Oh, right, of course.
They're still marching towards those nukes and missiles.
Yeah, it's a serious threat.
A threat to everyone.
Your regional and global security, absolutely.
Okay, let's switch gears to another global challenge. Climate change.
Yeah.
COP29 wrapped up in Baku.
How did that go?
Well, world leaders are grappling with this, trying to figure out how to address it.
Right, it's a tough one.
It is.
I mean, there are some really difficult choices and trade-offs.
Right. When you're talking about transitioning to a more sustainable future,
Absolutely.
emissions reductions, financial assistance for developing countries, what to do about fossil fuels, it's complicated.
And we have to remember that climate change is a threat multiplier.
Oh, absolutely.
It intensifies existing tensions, creates new conflicts over resources, displaces millions of people.
Right.
It's a huge security challenge.
It's a collective action problem, right?
It is.
Demanding global cooperation.
But as we've seen, reaching a consensus and turning pledges into action, it's a monumental task.
Yeah, it's not easy.
November also saw a lot of diplomatic activity.
Oh, yeah.
Trump's been on the phone.
Yeah, working the phones.
Talking to world leaders, signaling his priorities.
Setting the stage for his second term.
Putin, Xi, Netanyahu, everyone's watching, trying to figure out what he's going to do.
Yeah, trying to decipher his intentions.
It's a time of heightened anxiety.
For sure. I mean, another 4 years of Trump, who knows what's going to happen. So, looking back at November, what are the key takeaways? What did we learn?
Well, I think one of the most striking things is just the sheer scale of instability we're seeing. I mean, conflicts are escalating, crises are deepening, and new challenges are emerging, across the globe.
And it seems like that rules-based international order that we've relied on for so long is really under strain.
Oh, absolutely.
From the veto of that Sudan resolution to the disregard for international law in Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing norms and institutions just being ignored.
And at the same time, those power dynamics are shifting.
Yeah, big time.
China's rising, Russia's resurging, traditional alliances are fraying.
Right.
It's a multipolar world.
It is, and that makes it harder to find common ground.
Absolutely, and we're seeing this whole new generation of threats emerge.
Yeah, it's not just the old stuff anymore.
Cyber warfare, climate change, the weaponization of information.
It's a whole new ballgame.
These are challenges that require new thinking.
Absolutely.
New strategies, a new level of international cooperation.
I mean, we're living in an era of unprecedented complexity.
It's volatile, interconnected.
The challenges are huge.
They are.
But there are also opportunities.
Right.
We need clear-eyed analysis, strategic thinking, and bold action.
Okay, so let's zoom in on some specific regions.
Okay.
And see how these global security trends are playing out.
Sounds good.
Let's start with Africa.
All right.
A continent that's becoming increasingly critical to the global security landscape.
It really is.
Let's begin with the Sahel.
Okay.
That region's been hit hard.
Oh, yeah.
By instability and conflict.
Absolutely.
And the creation of that alliance of Sahel states, that's a clear indication, right?
Yeah, I think it is.
That there's frustration with those traditional power structures like ECOWAS.
Right, they're looking for alternatives.
And these countries are dealing with a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Poverty, climate change, weak governance, extremist groups.
It's a lot to deal with.
And the international community's been involved for years.
Yeah, but progress has been slow.
The situation in Mali really illustrates this.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
The military junta there, they grabbed power in 2021.
Right.
They're not interested in returning to democratic rule.
No, not really.
And the security situation is getting worse.
It's a real mess.
And then the French withdrew.
Right, which just added another layer of uncertainty.
Exactly.
It's part of a broader trend, I think.
Of Western powers reassessing their commitments.
Yeah, they're realizing the old approaches aren't working.
Right.
We need new strategies, ones that prioritize local actors and build sustainable solutions.
Okay, let's move to the Horn of Africa.
Okay.
Somalia is still battling al-Shabaab.
Yeah, it's a long fight.
They're transitioning from the African Union mission to a UN peacekeeping force.
Right, but it's fragile.
It is.
But, you know, the Somali people have shown incredible resilience.
They have.
They're trying to rebuild their country, but they need help.
And then there's Ethiopia.
Yeah, that conflict's really destabilized the whole region.
The war in the Tigray region has been horrific.
Absolutely devastating.
And country is still deeply divided.
It's a tragedy.
Now, to Central Africa, the DRC.
Okay.
They continue to be ravaged by violence and instability.
It's a country with so much potential,
Right.
but crippled by corruption, weak governance, and all these armed groups.
Millions have been driven from their homes.
It's a humanitarian catastrophe.
It is.
The international community needs to do more.
And there are allegations that Rwanda is supporting some of those armed groups in the DRC.
Yeah, which just adds another layer of complexity.
So let's think about maritime security for a minute.
Okay.
The Gulf of Guinea has become a real hotbed for piracy.
It's a major problem, yeah.
It is.
It's a threat to shipping lanes, to economies.
And you have transnational criminal networks involved.
Oh, yeah, they're in everything.
Drugs, human smuggling, illegal fishing.
You name it, they're involved.
So across the Atlantic to Latin America,
Right.
facing its own set of challenges.
It always is, it feels like.
Economic hardship, political instability, organized crime. It's putting a lot of pressure on these countries.
It really is.
And the political landscape is polarized.
Yeah, increasingly so.
The rise of populist leaders, the erosion of democratic institutions.
It's a volatile mix.
It is.
The region is at a crossroads.
Okay, let's start with Mexico.
All right.
Still ravaged by drug violence.
The cartels are incredibly powerful.
They are.
And the war on drugs has been a complete failure.
It's led to unprecedented violence.
Absolutely, it's a disaster.
And the flow of drugs into the U.S. continues.
It's a tough problem to solve.
And then there's Central America,
Okay.
the Northern Triangle
El
countries.
Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras.
They're grappling with a humanitarian crisis.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Gang violence, poverty, climate change.
Thousands are fleeing their
I'm
homes.
seeking refuge in the U.S.
It's a reminder that we need a more humane approach to migration.
Absolutely.
One that addresses the root causes.
And sadly, the political landscape there is getting more volatile.
Yeah, not good.
The rise of authoritarian leaders.
It's worrying.
Venezuela is still struggling.
Yeah, Maduro's still clinging to power.
But the cost has been enormous.
It's a humanitarian catastrophe.
It is.
And the international community is divided on how to respond.
Okay, let's talk about some of those high-level meetings that happened in November.
Okay, the summits and stuff.
The G20, APEC, ASEAN.
Yeah, lots of talk.
They provide a platform for dialogue, cooperation. But
But it's getting harder to find common ground.
the war in Ukraine dominated a lot of the conversations.
Right, understandably.
World leaders condemned Russia, called for peace, pledged to support Ukraine.
And the war's economic fallout is being felt everywhere.
Yes.
Higher energy prices, disrupted supply chains.
Climate change was another big topic.
Of course.
World leaders reaffirmed their commitment to the Paris Agreement.
But the transition to a low-carbon economy is a massive undertaking.
It is.
And it's not just about technology and economics, it's about justice.
Right. Climate justice.
Recognizing that those who have benefited most from the activities that caused climate change have a moral obligation to help those suffering the most.
So let's talk about China.
All right.
Their rise is reshaping the world.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
And the rivalry between the U.S. and China is intensifying.
Playing out on multiple fronts: trade, technology, military power, ideology.
And the war in Ukraine has further strained that relationship.
Yeah, it's pushed China closer to Russia.
And the Taiwan issue remains a major flashpoint.
Yeah, that's a powder keg.
So what about Russia?
Well, they're increasingly isolated.
Their economy is hurting,
Sanctions are taking their toll.
and their reputation is damaged.
Yeah, but we shouldn't underestimate them.
And their relationship with China is getting stronger.
It's a marriage of convenience.
Now, let's go to the Middle East.
Okay.
The Israeli-Palestinian conflict continues,
Tragic.
and the rise of extremist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, terrorism remains a serious threat.
And then there's the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
A rivalry that's been going on for decades.
And the nuclear standoff with Iran.
It's a volatile mix.
The human cost of all this is just staggering.
It really is.
Millions displaced. A refugee crisis of epic proportions.
We need a compassionate response from the international community.
Finally, let's talk about the Arctic.
Okay.
Climate change is transforming the region.
Yeah. Melting ice, new shipping routes, access to resources.
And we're seeing increased militarization.
It's becoming a potential flashpoint.
We need cooperation, not conflict.
Absolutely, we need to work together to manage the risks.
It's a lot. Right.
It really is.
All these crises, shifting power dynamics.
It can feel overwhelming.
But we have to remember, this isn't just abstract stuff. This is impacting our lives,
Absolutely. It has real-world consequences.
Like the global economy.
Yeah, I mean, it's teetering on the edge.
The war in Ukraine, the energy crisis, the cost of living, it's all connected.
And it's affecting everyone.
We're going to see more economic volatility, maybe for years.
I think that's a safe bet.
Job losses, higher prices, lower living standards.
It's something that's tough.
And the U.S. is stepping back.
Yeah, from that global leadership role.
So who fills that void?
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
And what does that mean for global trade, for cooperation, for democracy, for human rights?
A world without a strong U.S. is a more dangerous world.
And then you add in technology.
Oh, right. Technology's a game changer.
It's moving so fast.
It's a double-edged sword, that's for sure.
Cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, AI.
It's a whole new set of threats.
And these are threats that can disrupt our lives, undermine our democracies.
Even threaten our existence.
We need to be proactive.
Invest in cybersecurity, promote digital literacy.
We need ethical guidelines for these technologies.
Absolutely.
But amidst all of this, the technology, the geopolitics, we can't forget about the human cost.
Yeah, that's the most important thing.
Millions are suffering because of conflict, displacement.
We have a moral obligation to help.
Humanitarian assistance, refugee support, peaceful conflict resolution.
It's about addressing the root causes of insecurity.
Poverty, inequality, injustice.
It's a long road.
But we can build a more just and equitable world.
I believe that.
A world where everyone can live in peace and security.
That's the dream.
So what can we do? What can we do as individuals?
Stay informed, stay engaged.
Educate yourself about these challenges.
Support organizations doing good work.
Hold our leaders accountable.
And speak out.
Use your voice.
Advocate for change.
We can't solve everything overnight.
No, but we can make a difference.
The future is something we create together.
Through our choices and actions.
So let's choose a future of peace, security, and justice.
That's a future worth fighting for.
That's all for this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
We hope you found it informative.
And thought-provoking.
Remember, knowledge is power.
The more we understand, the better equipped we are to find solutions.
Stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
See you next time.
Keep diving deep.